Well, welcome everybody again. Glad you're here. Excited to kick this off. Excited to talk about this topic. Are you an underserved merchant? And we're going to walk through some of the key indicators to watch for. We've got some great panelists here on the call. So welcome. I think you're in for a treat. Again, thanks for joining. Recognize some names, some folks that we've interacted with over the years, and some new folks as well. So really glad to have you with us. Without further ado, I will kick things off, and we will have a recording available, and we'll also have a Q&A at the end. So please jot down those questions, hold those questions, and we should have plenty of time to talk through any questions and really have a good conversation throughout. So welcome to the webinar. Want to introduce the experts here. Meet Chris Deck. He's the founder and CEO of Deck Commerce. Thanks for being with us, Chris. Meet Jason Nyhus. He is the president and general manager of Shopware. Thanks, Jason. Glad to have you. And Ana Paula is helping us from an administrative standpoint. She's on our team here at Wagento. I am Cody Norris, head of solutions at Wagento Commerce. Welcome to all the panelists. So the topic here, are you stuck in between two very commonly seen situations in the e-commerce world? So one is, do you have an SMB budget? So maybe a growing business with requirements that aren't quite SMB. So maybe not your run-of-the-mill, turn on the shop and you're good to go type e-commerce or fulfillment, or you name it. You've got some unique requirements. And so you find things aren't quite working out with the software that's in your price range, or that's most commonly sold to merchants like you. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got options available to you that are maybe more enterprise in terms of cost, in terms of features, and you find they may be a bit overkill for what you're trying to do, and just frankly not accessible from a budget standpoint, and so you're stuck in between. So the question is, does that fit the bill? Is that where you are, and what do you do about that? So what often happens, and I know these guys will attest to it as we give the floor to them, is that you're faced with a decision, right? So you have on the one hand, you have the option to go ahead and say, all right, well, the SMB tools don't work for me, so I've got to make a change, and I'm going to have to go ahead and spring for the enterprise software, the enterprise implementation, et cetera, and just bite the bullet. Maybe it's going to be inefficient. Maybe it's going to be too much for what my business needs from a number of different standpoints, but that's the only option I've got. Or, you know what, we've got additional requirements. The software doesn't do it for us. So it's time to hire somebody or multiple people to manually handle our requirements. And I know Chris will speak to that extensively, because oftentimes that happens in the operational realm. So sometimes you're faced with that decision, and you end up paying too much for people or too much for software, and the ROI just isn't there. There must be a better way, but a lot of merchants that are in this category, the better way is not obvious. It's not very clear. All right, so this is a webinar where you get to participate, and we invite you to participate. Like I said, there will be a Q&A at the end, but also grab a piece of paper or open up a note on your phone or whatever and follow along here. We're going to walk through 14 key indicators that will identify, is your business being underserved? So please, again, follow along, tick these off as we go. Does this fit? Does this describe you? Does it not? And then we'll circle back at the end and see how you did. So please do that, participate in that way with us. All right, I want to hand the floor over to Jason first. Jason's going to talk us through digital indications that you may be an underserved merchant. Go ahead, Jason.
Fabulous. Well, first of all, let me say thank you. It's an honor to be here with Wagento, our agency partner, as well as Deck, an order management partner of ours as well. This is a unique conversation around, are you underserved? And I got to tell you, in my world, there are 18 different commerce platforms that are listed on the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Okay. And there's a whole bunch that aren't. And so there's no shortage of really wonderful solutions to solve merchant problems from a commerce platform perspective. However, why this is a meaningful conversation is because the needs of the merchants evolve as they grow, as their budgets change, as their skills change. And so what we really want to unlock for you is a moment of awareness around, does the platform I chose 4 years ago still kind of meet my needs of today and the challenges that I'm facing in my business? Because let's face it, the world we're in today is very different than the one we've been in historically, especially in e-commerce. So the first indicator or digital indicator of that you might be being underserved is if your platform you're using talks about the world as SMB or enterprise, and you don't really naturally fit into either of those camps. Okay. We like to say the term at Shopware, we serve the mid-market. That's our primary category of merchants we go and serve. And to illustrate the point, we call it the flyover states of e-commerce. The people who have enterprise class expectations and needs, but the budget of an SMB. And it has less to do with the revenue that they drive through it, but more some of the characteristics of their businesses that have evolved. And so that's the first leading indicator of are you working with a platform that doesn't really even appreciate the fact that you're in the middle and they have solutions for either SMB or enterprise. Cody, anything to add on that topic?
I think I see that all the time talking to merchants that, they're evaluating options and very often they find themselves, again, especially mid-market, they find themselves looking at a SaaS offering or, something that's very kind of cookie cutter, obviously could be customized, but that's a different conversation, or something that is way too cumbersome for them to even manage, let alone too costly. So I see the same thing all the time.
Fabulous. And I will say that some of the most effective sales and marketing machines ever invented are software companies. And so a lot of times the market starts to talk about whether they need a composable solution or a multi-tenant SaaS solution or an open commerce solution. The words that we've created has really created a lot of market confusion as to what is right for the merchant, which is also part of Are You Underserved? Number 2 on our list is growth becomes expensive. And there's kind of multiple ways to think about it. There's the operating expense that you have to pay your people to do more. And I've yet to meet a person who's in e-commerce who has enough time to do all of the things on their list. And so we see in a lot of scenarios, companies trying to add new countries to go global to grow their revenue, to add different product lines, making digital products or warranties or other services, or they might own multiple brands. And when you start to add on multiple brands and all these other categories, you actually not only increase the overhead to manage, but you also, in a lot of commerce platforms, are charging you additional fees to do so. And so if that's your experience, you're probably underserved because there are solutions in the market who've got really elegant ways to deal with things like multi-storefront or unlimited channels that ultimately don't end up costing you more, but all from a licensing perspective, but also the level of effort to manage it and to launch it is significantly more efficient. So Cody, this has got to be near and dear to your heart. I'd love to hear your take on the value of really elegantly serving multi-storefront.
Yeah, I see this often as a future plan, right? So someone's evaluating platforms and this is on the horizon for them, but it's not high enough on the priority list for them to truly evaluate it appropriately. And so they end up checking a box and saying, does this have multi-storefront? Yes. Okay, great. We'll deal with that when we get to it. And that's a dangerous thing because like you say, there's some nuance to, well, how will I manage it? What will it cost me? How will I deploy it? All of those questions oftentimes don't get answered if it's a future stage. And for, the mid-market, I would say about half the time I see it is a future state where they say, yes, we want to grow. Yes, it will be multi-storefront one day. And so again, my caution here is just, if they just check a box that multi-storefront's available, that's not the full picture.
Yeah. And I'm sure Chris is going to get into it a lot, but the fact that you can have a simple storefront that allows, easy to replicate different storefronts, that's one problem. But how do you deal with the inventory availability across all these regions? That's where it really becomes an administrative challenge. So excellent. So yeah, that's point number 2. Growth becomes expensive. Okay. Number 3, on the same kind of line of thinking around costs, I've been in e-commerce for almost 5 years. And what happens in our industry is similar to others, where there's these best practices that start to emerge. And one of those is everything is managed in a multi-tenant SaaS environment, which is really good for the platform provider. Another big trend is that everything is a revenue share. Well, that's also really good for the commerce platform provider. And what it has created is an environment where the merchant themselves no longer gets economic benefit of your own scale. It's a mouthful. What do I mean? It means if you're a $1 million merchant using a product like Shopify, which is an amazing world-class solution, they're giving that $1 million merchant scale and capability of someone that's doing 25 times their business, 25 million. So in other words, if you're on Shopify and you're using it and you're less than 25, you're getting enormous benefits of their scale. However, when you go above that, that's where you can really unlock better offers, better discounts, and how much commerce costs you. So Shopify just raised their rate in February, and they gave merchants 3 months to try and terminate or renew. Well, 3 months is a short window. Their rate is now 40 basis points of GMV. If you double or triple or quadruple your revenue, their rate will still be 40 basis points of GMV. So in other words, your growth, you get no benefit of your scale in terms of discounting as to how much you pay on a relative basis. The second point, and this is not necessarily specific to Shopify, is all of us probably signed up for a consumer solution like a Netflix or a Disney Plus, or even were early adopters in Uber when it came out. And I think everybody probably remembers how cheap all these solutions were. Well, what happened was they started to gain leverage. And the price that they started on is very different than the price they charge today. And so if you work with a provider who in their agreement has the right to change their price at any time, you're underserved, because we've seen one iteration of it in January or February. We'll see more in the coming years. So number 3, like I talked about, if your revenue doubles and your price as a percent stays the same, if your provider has the right to raise their price at any time, you might be underserved. Cody, anything to add there?
No, you said it well, not on that one.
Okay. The next on number 4 is vendor lock-ins. It's not a term that e-commerce platforms generally use, but I'll use it. And what it means is they've pre-negotiated rates, buy rates, effectively from payment providers, and there's an incentive for them to force you to use those providers, okay? They do this because commerce platforms can make more money on pushing a payment product, a tax product, a fraud engine, a WCMS, whatever, than they actually make for selling you the commerce platform itself. And maybe not the more, but equal to or greater than, okay? And so because of this, a lot of commerce platforms are now mandating that you utilize their payment infrastructure as an example, or their cross-border capabilities. The reason they do that is because, again, that's where the margin is. And if you are locked in and your revenue triples or quadruples over a 3-year period, all that upside goes to the platform instead of back to the bottom line of the merchant. So vendor lock-ins, in principle, are a bad outcome for merchants. And if you have those in your agreements, you might be underserved.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that one. I see this as really comparable to if you're renovating a home or you're building a home, you've got a general contractor, right? And your hope is that when they go to hire the electrician, they don't just go to their favorite electrician, regardless of the price. Your hope is that they shop around, right? They get the best rate, the best price for that piece of the job. And if they don't, then you're likely paying too much. If that were in your hands to shop around, you'd probably get a better deal. And I think the mid-market, again, mid-market oftentimes falls into this underserved category. The mid-market, they've got some ability from a finance standpoint, from a personnel standpoint, to do some procurement, to do some legwork on this. And it's worth it. It pays off, right? These roles at mid-market companies, pay for themselves. And if you've got vendor lock-in, you've lost that ability. So you don't want to do endless legwork, but the beauty of e-commerce platforms is that there's typically a handful of well-known providers to meet different requirements. But if you have to be shoehorned into only using one, then again, from a cost standpoint, you can't find savings for yourself, not to mention requirements.
Bingo. And I think the threshold, just to put it in perspective, I think once you get above 25 million, you start to have some negotiating power with all of your quote unquote vendors. And if you are buying from a vendor lock-in provider, you've given up all that negotiation leverage. So good example, Cody, on the house. Okay. So number 5, this one is a little more subtle that I don't think people really appreciate, that they're being underserved. Let me tell a little story as to why first. But the point is the high reliance on third-party apps for basic needs. And the origin of this problem actually goes back maybe even 10 years or more. And what happened was in the early 2010s, which is in late 2000s, that's when most of the commerce platforms that are mainstay in the US or globally were actually deployed, put in the market. And what happened was we had rapid innovation in the 2010 to 2020 range, things like mobile commerce, social commerce, marketplaces. And what all these things ended up doing is these commerce platforms that weren't built for those contexts had to refactor their core product, okay? And so that meant there was not a lot of new innovation happening in commerce engines. Rather, they were trying to retrofit a solution with old code to meet today's challenges. And you could add on to that, right? It's got composabilities and APIs and webhooks and all these things that kind of came after the original commerce platforms in the market. And so the net effect of that is core commerce platforms have outsourced a lot of innovation to their app store partners. And so what happens now for a mid-market merchant is you end up having a whole bunch of apps to do things that are basic needs. And that in itself is excellent. It's great. It's a vibrant ecosystem is what you should look for when you buy a commerce platform. However, when you start to recognize that you have enormous dependencies on basic needs and you have dozens of vendors that you have to manage and you have contract liability and your data is being shared with them, and who knows what acceptable use policies are out there or compliance challenges you're accepting the risk of. But more importantly, and probably most importantly, where it's acute is in performance of the site. So if you look in your bill from your e-commerce provider and the cost of the apps are greater than the cost of the software, you're probably underserved. Cody?
Yeah, I see this all the time in the mid-market where, we're talking to a prospect or working with a client. And again, like you say, they bought into an ecosystem years ago. And since then, they've been iterating and modifying. And the amount of third parties that they're dealing with is just astronomical. And a single one could, you know, essentially break the site, or at least break a key functionality on the site. And you know, some merchants might say that's just the game today. That's the way it goes. But I think it's important to know that that is the case, you know, and is that the only way? I think that's an important question to ask before just, you know, biting the hook, line, and sinker and saying this is the way it's got to be.
Yep. And then number 6 is the box too restrictive. And this is actually a really common one. It's a little harder to say if this is your pain or not. But, you know, I tell people that Shopify is the greatest box ever invented for e-commerce. And if you fit inside that box, you should buy from them. Okay. And I believe it. And if your revenue is under 25 million and you have a simple business, just go to Shopify. They're the world's greatest. However, what you'll notice in especially cases like B2B is there's workflows or unique processes or experience or things that actually separate you from your competition in the physical world that some brands are being talked into living without in a digital one. And I just don't think that's the right long-term strategy for a lot of brands to try and kind of fit into the box. And to support the story, I was at an event here in Minneapolis, which is where I'm from, and there was a merchant who's a pretty great apparel brand. And we were talking about this exact topic. And he had told me a story about one of his friends sending him a screenshot of a small competitor of theirs. And he said, hey, it looks like they've stolen your template and your look and feel. It looks exactly like your store. And the guy replied, no, I'm just running on Shopify and this is a template that everybody uses. And so this brand who differentiates on experience looks like everybody else's. And so that was a little bit of an aha moment that, you know, these mid-market brands who have outgrown their SMB roots actually need to compete on the basis of something other than price. It's about experience and it's about unique, how they interact with their reps and all those other things. So if your unique business processes, experience, or even integrations aren't supported, you're probably being underserved.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add is that I've seen businesses attempt to modify all of that to fit the box and say, you know what, it's more affordable, it's easier, let's just change our process to fit the software, you know, or let's just forget about that unique experience that was important to us and fit the software. And I've seen projects, you know, head towards launch that way, and then the business realizes we can't do that. There's too much about our business that would have to change if we're just trying to do that to fit a software and achieve a certain cost or, you know, implementation or whatever. I've seen enough projects like that get paused and reevaluate because it just, for certain businesses, especially mid-market, to ask the entire business to change and adapt to a certain software in the mix is asking too much, and it's unreasonable. If you can, please do it. You know, if you can modify the business, then what were you doing in the first place, running the business that way? Let's make it easier and more straightforward and common, but oftentimes it's not possible. All right, we're gonna hand it over to Chris. Jason, thank you for leading us through those. Chris, let's give it to you.
Wow, what a great conversation so far. I'm Chris Deck. I'm founder, CEO of Deck Commerce. We're an order management system, and I can't think of a better way to have been teed up than what Jason just walked us through. Deck Commerce was founded with the realization that as brands and merchants are investing in their front-end shopping experience to, you know, deliver their unique brand value prop and connect with their customers in meaningful ways, that after that order is created, there was a big gap in support and functionality from a processing perspective. And Deck Commerce was founded to fill that gap and to make sure that the experience that the consumer has at the front end is followed through all the way through delivery and even into returns. So a lot that we're going to talk about here is building off of what Jason walked us through on the front end. And I've categorized this first slide into a subcategory of what I would say the operational indications that drive consumer experiences. An interesting stat that we think of a lot at Deck Commerce is that 87% of all consumers are willing to pay a premium to shop directly with brands that they like and trust. That's a huge statement when you think of the margins that merchants are operating under, as well as the competitive pressures that they have. However, consumer expectations are high, and if you don't deliver basic functionality and support post-order, they will leave you and go to the bigger boxes and the companies that really have commoditized a lot of e-commerce. So it's really important to get these consumer experience things right. And some indications that you're struggling in this would start off with inventory. Jason talked about it before. The ability to expose your inventory across channels is key. If you're sitting on stale inventory that you don't have access to because you can't figure out how to get it up to your selling channels, that's a problem. Maybe even the bigger problem is stockouts. If you find yourself canceling orders or notifying customers that the item isn't available, that is a big indication that you're being underserved. Consumer experience goes right through the toilet if you can't fulfill the order that you promised for them to fulfill. Number 2 or number 8 on this list, the number one reason for call center activity is where's my order? It's the number one source of emails and phone calls. When a customer is put in a situation where they got to reach out and ask where their order is, you are offering them a subpar shopping experience. So the key is, if you have a lot of these situations, a lot of customers, you put in your emails that were running behind on your order confirmations or tracking emails, you might be underserved. Processing orders quickly and efficiently and cost effectively is a very good way of ensuring that consumers don't have to ask you, where's your order? Third thing from a consumer experience perspective are returns. Let's face it, everyone, returns happen. It's usually one of the last things thought about when building out your solution. You're hoping that all your growth is going to go through the roof, and you forget that there is a component, 10%, 15%, depending on your market, they're going to be coming back as returns. So the question that you have to ask yourselves, are your returns processes, are they an asset or are they a liability? Both for your end consumer, is the experience seamless and easy so that it turns them into an advocate, as well as for your internal staff? How hard is it to process these returns? How much staff do you need to run these things? If you look at returns as a liability or a growth inhibitor for you, you might be underserved. And I love this Jeff Foxworthy theme that we've got going on here.
And I'll just chime in, Chris, that I see these as the areas where merchants just compensate with staff. They say, well, I guess my best option is to hire 5 people in customer service. And that's just the nature of doing business. And it's not.
It's not. Doesn't have to be. Absolutely not. And here's the things that, go back 1 second, Cody. I'm sorry. I just want to follow this up with what I think is one of the most powerful things from an order management perspective, from an operational perspective. How do operations really help the top and bottom line for merchants? Happy customers are loyal customers. Loyal customers buy more. They buy more per order, so your average order value goes up, and they buy more frequently. That's the holy grail of merchants, definitely mid-market and really across the spectrum, is to drive loyal customers And these are some of the operational challenges that could get in the way. Okay. These indicators really fall under a broader bucket of operational efficiency. Things that you do post-order or need to do post-order to deliver on that brand promise. The first indicator, if you're using spreadsheets or emails or Post-it notes or printed paper, if you're operating in a manual process-oriented world, you are probably being underserved right now by your vendors. A study done by McKinsey a couple years ago put an estimate that manual processes can cost anywhere from 50 cents to over $2 per process on processing an order. So number one, that can be expensive. But number two, that also creates a bog down of speed. It's slower to process things manually, and it also increases error rates. Manual processes are prone to errors. So if you find yourself doing lots of manual processing, you are likely an underserved merchant. Number two, this is the other side of the omni-channel coin. Jason talked about selling across channels, across regions, across brands, etc. The omni-channel selling, hugely important. Also important is the back-end omni-channel fulfillment. In order to deliver your inventory up to your selling channels, you need to be able to know where you have inventory across different systems and different platforms. And then if you do a good job of activating that inventory and having a great front-end selling experience and your average order volume is going up, guess what? Your line items in a cart are also going up. And then the challenge to convert those orders into shipments across a distributed network of locations is a challenge. If you struggle taking orders and effectively splitting them into shipments across all your sources of inventory, you're probably an underserved merchant. And lastly, I will call these some of the technical indicators, some of the things that your IT team is probably thinking about or worried about. One of the most common things that we hear when we're talking to merchants who are underserved is that the business wants to go fast, but the IT team, the operations team can't support them. They're Frankensteining an ERP system, or they've built their own custom middleware, and the business is trying to figure out how to work around them. If you find that your technical team, your operations team can't keep up with the business desires to deliver great experiences to their consumers, you're probably an underserved merchant at this point. Conversely, again, Jason and Cody talked about this before. If your back-end systems are not flexible, if you can only do things one way because that's the only thing that this solution supports, you're an underserved merchant. All of the growth in retail is happening on the digital front. That's where all the innovation is happening. Payments, tax, fraud, email, you name it. That's all coming to bear on the front end experience. And you need to factor that into your back end processing as well. And if it's difficult to add a new payment method because you can't settle payments after the order's been placed, that's an underserved indicator for sure. And then lastly, and I'll wrap this up with the creme de la creme, the holy grail of commerce, of retail in general, is those critical days around Thanksgiving. You got Black Friday, you got Cyber Monday. If you're worried, or worse, if you're working your tail off on Black Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Cyber Monday, you're an underserved merchant. If you're worried that your front end site can't make it without you keeping the gerbils rolling, that's a problem. If you're worried that your orders aren't going to be flowing and that you're going to crash all your downstream systems, that's a problem. I'll give you a small story about what we do on Black Friday weekend. We're ready. We are manning the ship. We've got our eyes on all the key dials to make sure that things are performing well. But knock on wood, we are thinking about the following year during that weekend. Things are running smoothly, flowing like clockwork. And we're actually strategically thinking, how can we help our business, our customers, how can we help our merchants do better next year? What insights can we gain from all the things that we've learned in this year? So for us, we use that downtime while we're on high alert to be thinking strategically about growth and innovation in the upcoming year. If you're spending your Black Friday weekend stressed about operations, you're an underserved merchant. And I'll leave it there.
Chris, one thing I'll tag on is I think especially the bullet points on the page here. A lot of times these merchants are on the enterprise software because they know they've got complex needs, but to configure them, to prepare for the traffic, those types of requirements, not only are they spending an arm and a leg on the software, but the software is not flexible enough, or I should say, not easily configurable in order to make the changes that need to be made.
That's right. The world is moving fast, and if you're kind of tied down with a more, let's just call it a legacy enterprise solution that wasn't built with a modern technology stack, it's not really in the cloud. They might have put a little skin in the cloud. It's going to slow you down, yeah, and that's underserved.
All right, great. How did you do? I hope you were ticking off boxes, checking your list to see where you fall on the spectrum. So as you saw before we walked through these indicators, if you've said yes to maybe between 1 and 6 of these, then you're probably in good shape. The software you have is meeting your needs, and you're in a good spot. So thank you for coming. You are not underserved if you fall in that category. Now, if you've checked yes to 7, 8, or certainly 9 and above of these indicators, then you've just found out that you are an underserved merchant. And so that might be news to you. You might have been feeling the pains of that. You might have been wondering, is this normal? Is every merchant in our size or complexity struggling with these same things? And we're here to tell you there is another way. You do not have to simply hire more people or bite the bullet and pay for a software that's extremely expensive but maybe doesn't quite meet your needs to a T. Probably most important in our time together, and we've got some time left for it, is Q&A. So please, if you've been thinking of questions, drop them into the chat. We're really eager for this to be interactive. And I know there are some brilliant people on the call with all different backgrounds and experiences along these lines. So any comment, question is welcome. Disagree with us if you like. Point out something we missed. Let's hear from you all. All right, first question. This is probably for Chris. Chris, you mentioned automation in operational processes. Do you have a benchmark that merchants can use as a barometer?
No, great question. We do. In fact, one of the things that often comes up during a process of getting to know a merchant and understanding how they're operating is to kind of map out the number of steps that happen to fulfill an order. And then to cross-reference that against the number of things that merchants are doing manually. Usually, before they're using a properly designed and configured order management system, 20 to 30% of their post-order processing is manual. That is a huge deal. We talked about the cost before. We talked about how that slows things down, increases error rates, increases where's my order calls into the solution. Our goal with our customers is to get their automation processing above 95%, so that they truly are only worrying about the true exceptions. Maybe a payment failure, things that truly do require a manual intervention to look at. And that allows them to redirect resources. It allows them to redirect budget all kinds of things to driving a better consumer experience rather than manually processing things that can and should be automated. So our benchmark industry, we say about 75% is automated, generally speaking. We like to get our customers up into the upper 90% from an automation perspective.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Another question here. I love this one. All right. So should a business change its processes to match its software or customize its software to match its processes? I know I spoke to this a little bit, but Jason, Chris, either of you want to take this up?
Go for it, Jason. You go first.
Yeah, I'll take a swing. That's a very elegantly written question. So kudos to whoever asked it. It's a nuanced answer, and it's not black and white, and it really depends on your business. I've met with hundreds of businesses who simply are overly complex, and I think they recognize that complexity doesn't necessarily need to exist, and they use e-commerce as an example to be a forcing function to fit into a much narrower set of capabilities, because frankly they know they need it, and it's kind of a forced GLP-1 diet that the business needs to go on. However, I would say that that's not a universal case either. From our experience, we see brands who, as I described earlier, there are certain things about why they are in business that stand out from their competition. And to give those things up just simply to fit into a box so that they can sell online makes no sense. And I think it makes more sense in B2B than even in B2C. So my answer to your question, Cody, is it all depends how important e-commerce is. It all depends on if the things that you're doing are with great intent and they're how you separate yourself from everybody else, then by no means should you try and fit into a box. But if you're simply super inefficient and you kind of do things because that's the way it's always been done, then kind of retrofitting yourself into a box in a lot of scenarios can be helpful. So as it relates to our core audience here, the underserved mid-market, what I found time and time again is it's more the former, meaning there are things that they have to continue to separate themselves from the pack, and they should not and can try to fit that into a box. So long-winded answer. Hopefully I answered both spectrums and appreciated some nuance. That's how I'd give it to you.
You know, Jason, I couldn't agree more. It is nuanced, and again, I agree. Great question. Here's another angle that I would put on there. For merchants that we're talking to and addressing in this presentation is, how do you know? How do you know if you've created something that's Frankenstein that really adds no value, but it's because you've always done it that way? Versus, is it unique to your business? Is it a way in which you connect uniquely to your customers? And when you are with a partner who is right-sized for you, they help you with those things. What we take a lot of pride in is being domain experts from an order management perspective. We've seen things done every which way up and down, and we have a pretty good understanding and case studies to back it up on what we believe is the most effective way, the best practice way of processing things. So when you're working with the right vendor, they can help guide you. Here's what we see as the most scalable, the most effective, whatever the criteria is, and then help the merchant evaluate the pros and cons if they start going their own way. It gives you a lot of comfort that when you are going your own way, when you're customizing your software to meet your business, that you're doing it in a rational way that really represents your brand authentically to your consumers, and you're not doing it because it's the only way that you know how to do it. You got the hammer and everything's not necessarily a nail. So finding the right partners, which is often the challenge with underserved mid-market merchants, is a key to knowing whether you should be customizing your software or using business processes that are proven and scalable.
I love that point of, have you Frankensteined or have you customized?
Let me add on, actually, because I think Chris said something really important, and it's actually the role of Wagento in an experience like this. This is why agencies are the truth speakers as it relates to e-commerce. Agencies' job is it to make sure that you use the job for today, but also for tomorrow. That you're not creating a scenario where your needs change so much in a small window of 3 to 5 years that you need to do a replatforming or add different capabilities. So that's really, Cody, hopefully you agree with this. That's the vital role that you guys play in this ecosystem, is to make sure that you answer that question that you asked us for merchants.
Yeah, best practices. Merchants don't always know best practices, right? So from a fulfillment, from a customer experience on site, we often see a requirement met in a squirrely way, and it doesn't have to be met that way. But those best practices, when we look at the requirements of a merchant, and there's something that is unique, we can say, okay, this is an appropriate time to customize. There is not a plug and play for this.
Right.
This is a great time to customize. And that's a big differentiator from Frankensteining, because that's all you need to do. All right, we've got just a few more minutes, and I've got at least 2 more questions here. Okay, many times open source software, although flexible, comes with less support. Does the affordability pan out? I'm guessing this is talking about free, without a license, maybe like an open source Magento or something like that.
Sure. Well, so, I don't know if I said it, but Shopware is an e-commerce platform. We're one of the top 6 or 7 largest in the world by measured through GMV process. We're one of the fastest risers on the eyes of the analysts, the Forresters, the Gartners, etc. A visionary on the last Gartner MQ. But one of the things that really separates us is our commitment to the community. And we have a community edition, which is a full-featured open source version of our product. It is probably 60 to 70% of all people running Shopware are running on that version. So there is tremendous amount of value being delivered to the ecosystem at which they can utilize and add on to and monetize themselves. So I do think that that's a really meaningful, valuable thing. But just like the conversation before, it comes with nuance. When you take our open source product, you're kind of responsible to make it operate and run. And, you've got to wire up all of the connectors and things you need. You've got to be responsible for its security and performance. There's a lot of things that you got to do. Now, if you've got the skill sets and capacity to do it, by all means, we want you to. We love that you're doing it. And so the answer to your question is, if you've got the skill sets, open source is an amazing product capability. If you don't, you probably need to rely on agencies and/or maybe even purchase enterprise license, of which we obviously sell as well. So that's the answer. So just because it's free doesn't mean it's free to run. There are costs associated with getting it up and operational. So that's your answer.
One more question here that I have. All right, this would not be a webinar in 2024 if we didn't talk about AI, right? So here's the question. There's a lot of buzz about AI. Famous sentence right now. How do you think about AI as an indicator?
I'll take a crack at that. You hit the nail on the head. 2024 AI. It's here. Right now, it's here mostly from a marketing perspective. Is the way I look at it. I think the key is underpinning AI is really data, and data is not very valuable unless you can get business insights from it. And the holy grail that we're all thinking about and working on right now is leveraging artificial intelligence to drive business insights without human intervention. So what I would say first and foremost when you think about AI is, you really got to look under the hood and see if they're just calling something that's algorithms and a bunch of if-then statements, if they're now labeling that as AI. And 3 years ago it was considered, we have the strongest, sourcing algorithm on the market. Now it's called AI. If you see that kind of stuff, you're probably underserved because they're really not meeting your business needs. The thing that I would ask yourselves is, do you have access to data today that is allowing you to make meaningful and material adjustments based on real business insights? If you're flying blind, if you're craving for more information about your business, you're probably underserved. AI is the buzzword. Data is the really underlying factor. I do believe in the next 1, 3, 5 years for sure that AI is going to be way more prevalent in leveraging that data in meaningful ways. But I think today, right now, ask yourselves, are you flying blind? And if you are, you're probably underserved because you shouldn't be.
I'd love a crack at it as well. Hopefully this is coherent. You know, I always like to ask with what's the simplest question you could ask around the impact of something. And with regards to things like B2B commerce and the adoption of B2B commerce, the simple question is, will your reps make more money if they use it? It's a very simple question. And for most people, the answer is no, it's a mandate. They have to use it and blah, blah, blah. It's best for the company. And that's why a lot of kind of B2B commerce platforms have failed. And I think the same kind of question with AI is, does this make you better at your job if you're the e-commerce merchant? And I think that's probably the people we should think about as the customer who we're trying to solve and use AI to help their lives. There's a lot of blue collar work done by white collar people in e-commerce. And what I mean by that is when you add a product or merchandise, what you're really doing is a whole bunch of serial jobs. So we're going to add a product, we're going to add a description, we're going to add an image, we're going to categorize it, we're going to price it, we're going to promote it. All of these steps through the use of AI can be really, really automated in a way that actually makes them, instead of creators, but approvers. And so at Shopware, we were the first major commerce platform to integrate AI into our core product. And at this point, I think we still have more features and functions than any other major commerce platform. But the result of it is, and we have mass adoption, again, being open source and having 50,000 clients everywhere in the world is a huge advantage because we can drive adoption and get immediate or relatively immediately understanding of impacts and patterns. And what we've seen is nobody's lost their job yet because of AI. But what they've done is they've gotten 30, 40, 50% productivity gains, that stack of things they had to go do to make the company better, they can actually address the higher value things and let the system do some of the lifting on the lower value things, okay? And it gives them a platform to actually test and learn at a different rate and pace than they could before. So that's the real unlock, is the productivity gains that come from it. Now, I will say this, if your commerce platform was built in 2010 and you ask them what's going on with AI, they're probably going to tell you that they're going to lean on their partners to deliver it. And it's because of what I talked about before. The product is now built to deliver that kind of capability. And if they say that, the big risk to your brand is, again, higher reliance on third-party apps and what's being utilized of your data to help their business. And that's the big understood thing for merchants as to the data control and what's going to happen with future regulations and what you've allowed happening to your customer profile information and your catalog information. So I think the short terms, it's all around productivity gain. The long terms, it's going to be about compliance and making sure that you have control over the things that matter most to your brand. So hopefully that made sense.
Great. Very helpful. Jason, Chris, anything else you want to say before we close for the day?
Listen, if there's someone listening to this that finds these conversations stimulating and wants to continue them, I would love, I'm sure all of us would, the opportunity to have a conversation with you. I know that all of our brands are not a fit for everybody, but we do think we're a pretty good fit for the underserved merchant.
Sam, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and share thoughts with such a great panel. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And if you want to talk about processing orders, click on our little QR code here.
Yep, grab these QR codes. Jason, I love how you described us as the truth sayer in the matter. We love to be that and be an unbiased guide to analyze what's going on and help find a solution and put it together. So that's what we do at Wagento. All right, everyone, thank you so much for attending, for your participation. Wonderful to have you all. Chris, Jason, can't thank you enough. Really appreciate your insights and experience. here on this call together. And again, stay tuned. We'll have follow-up coming out from the marketing teams, so you'll get more information. Thank you so much.